Let's talk to JP Kloppers, who is the CEO of BrandsEye. Now, BrandsEye correctly predicted both Brexit and Trump's victory by looking at what people were saying on social media. JP, how did you manage to get the outcome correct? Well, all traditional polls got it wrong for Brexit and the US elections.
Hi, morning, Kat. Yeah, that's a great question. I think what social media gives us is a very fast read of what's happening broadly across a country or across a series of states, as we saw in the US. And I think what the polls suffer from is both the time lag, i.e. you need time for that data to come back. And as we've seen in both the referendum and in the US elections, people change their opinions very quickly. And unless your tools are able to measure that kind of quick reactive nature of what's happening, that time lag ends up being detrimental. But I think the second part is almost more important, which is the unsolicited nature of social media, which gives you the ability to measure the underlying emotion. And polls can be very almost matter of fact. You know, you ask the question and you get an answer. Whereas with social media, because you're not asking the question, and it's people expressing their opinions of their own volition, you get a view of the underlying raw emotion on why people feel the way that they feel.
Wow! So you're measuring, you're extracting underlying raw emotion from what? From people's status updates, from what they're sharing. How do you actually measure it?
It's from conversations between people. It could be a thread on Facebook. It could be a series of replies on Twitter. It could be people commenting on a news article and saying how they feel about that article. And this is the challenge with social media, is it's such a kind of a vast array of types of conversation, which is actually very hard to track. In the US, I think we tracked 47 million conversations. And how do you make sense of that is, what most companies or organizations struggle with. And because of how we use a kind of a distributed crowdsourcing platform where we use people to understand people, we can get to that underlying emotion by asking our crowd, how does this person feel about Trump or about Theresa May or whatever it is that we're trying to measure.
So you're measuring things right now for ahead of the general election?
We're kind of keeping a curious eye on it, more because we know that clients will be coming to us and asking about it, and so we're kind of looking at it broadly, but we haven't yet delved into the meat of what's happening.
Because I was going to ask you, who's getting the most sort of emotional reaction? You're talking about emotions. Is there a particular party or political leader that's getting the most emotion?
Look, I think May is getting way more conversation than everybody else, but that's almost natural as she's the incumbent. She's got three times more conversation than Corbyn, who has 4 times more than Farron. So those are kind of the ratios. I think if we were involved in this or advising people on what to look at, I think we'd say we need to take a very close look at the negative sentiment towards May, because that seems to be growing, and it's an area that machines would get the wrong answer. She's taking a lot of heat in the run up to the election, and that could be worrying.
Okay, so because people are talking about you doesn't mean that they're talking about you in a positive way.
No, and that's often where social media can be misleading if people are relying on algorithms to try and figure out that sentiment. Because if you think that in this case a machine would say 15% of people of the 150,000 people speaking about May are being positive, when actually the real answer is 6.7%, that's a lot less. And if you don't kind of have that view into who are actually supporting you versus who are your detractors, it can lead organizations down the wrong path. So again, we're not a polling company, so we haven't delved into this. But if we're advising clients on how to look at this data right now, I would say that is a somewhat interesting and potentially worrying sign that there's that level of negativity towards it.
Is this about being the least disliked? That certainly seemed to be what happened in the US elections between Clinton and Trump, and to a certain extent in the French presidential elections. Is this what now politicians are having to aim for, to be the least disliked of a pair?
I don't know if that's unique to the UK right now. I think that's a trend we're seeing around the world. And I think it's more a nature of of information spreading very rapidly and people being very reactive to that information spreading, that politicians need to be on top of it. But no, I don't think it's necessarily what we saw in the US, but it's more just I suppose, a take on the state of politics generally in the world today.
And you're looking at measuring Facebook and people's interactions with political parties and leaders on Facebook. But Facebook and social media can be used as well to sort of direct people, can't it? And to change opinions. It
can, yeah. I think social media, it is a tool, and that tool can be used for good or for evil. And we see many organizations using it to try and manipulate people rather than understand them. We're kind of trying to be one of the good guys who putting the tools in the hands of people who saying, we can help you understand how people really feel. Because our argument is if you can measure how people feel, then you'll arguably make better decisions around how to serve them. The dark side of social media is where it's used to kind of psychographically profile people and then manipulate them into kind of moving in a direction based on that underlying psychographic profile. And that's dangerous territory because it's not addressing the underlying emotion, but rather just getting a short-term result.
JP Kloppers, thanks ever so much for talking to me this morning.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That's JP Kloppers. He's the CEO of BrandsEye. We're going to be talking more about the role of Facebook and social media in the upcoming general election and in elections past.